So in the last section, we saw how we were using table storage within an Azure storage account as a very simple and easy way to sort of get up and running, to create a table, store some data into it. Even Microsoft recommends a better table experience, perhaps an enterprise grade table experience using CosmosDB. So in this section, we're going to be talking about CosmosDB as an alternative to using a storage account. Now, CosmosDB was recently added within the last couple of years within Azure and is meant to be, and as the name implies, built from the ground up for global distribution and the ability to scale to a very large number of transactions per second, etc. So if you're developing an application, let's say you're developing a mobile app and you're thinking that you're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of installs, 1 million installs of your mobile app, you would not build it on an Azure storage account. You would want to use something like CosmosDB, which is specifically designed and has certain SLAs and other guarantees for your data being available, not only locally, but around the world. It takes care of a lot of that stuff. Okay? So we're going to create our first CosmosDB account. It's not entirely straightforward. Now we recognize this wizard that is common to creating web apps and creating virtual machines. We're going to put this in a brand new resource group, so I'm going to call it AZ CosmosDB. And we have to create an account. So we haven't created any databases yet, similar to having a storage account that you have to then create tables for. This is a database account, and we'll have to create the databases separately. Now this database account has to be unique across all of Azure because we can see that it's fully qualified .documents.azure.com. So we're going to be referencing our CosmosDB. If we're going to be referencing our CosmosDB on the open web, we're going to be using a URL such as this. Now we have our first significant decision to make, and that is the type of API and the data model that we're going to use for our data. Now CosmosDB, as we see up here, is a multi-model database service. That means that the same CosmosDB can store data many different ways, and we get to choose as we're creating this database which way we want it to store data. Now these are NoSQL databases. That means there's no dependencies between tables. We're not going to create a master table and then a child table and then do a foreign key from the child table to the master table as you would in a relational database store. All of this CosmosDB, again, there's no relationships that are designed to be built in. Now the consequence of that is it's going to be extremely fast. You're going to be able to query this data, and Microsoft talks about sub 10 millisecond response times, something like 5 milliseconds in order, you do a query and the data comes back to you. Very, very fast response times. Now you get your choice of API. The API you choose dictates the way that the data is stored. So for instance, if you choose the MongoDB API, then the data is going to be stored using MongoDB. Even though there's an SQL option, that's just the query API, and again, the data is stored in a NoSQL manner. We also have a table option. Graph is sort of a relationship. There is relationships in graph modes where you basically have this person is friends with that person, this person has communicated with that person, etc. You can have multiple. This is more like a social graph than anything. So just by default, we're going to start with the SQL option. And again, it's chosen Australia for some reason. I'm going to put this into Canada. Now, very interesting, again, CosmosDB designed, even the name implies, for geo-redundancy. So by turning on geo-redundancy, it's going to duplicate my data not only in the Canada East that I chose, but it's going to put it into Canada Central. So built-in pairing between two regions, and in fact there's hundreds of miles and hundreds of kilometers between these two regions within Canada. So if there's a localized disaster in in Montreal region, for instance, then when it gets into Toronto region, it should be fine. So I'm going to enable that. It's by default. And then the other option is, do I want to have data that can be written to multiple regions? So this is actually like a two-way replication where you can write to Canada East and you can write to Canada Central, and whichever you do, that it's going to be replicated properly. You can see it's disabled by default. When you start to get into stuff like this, you start to get into a little bit more complexity in terms of your applications having to have their own database homes. Maybe there's some type of conflict where the same data gets written into two places within the same, second, and then some type of data that has to be merged intelligently to try to figure out what the differences between the data, etc. So having this actually adds a little bit of complexity and the chance of data conflicts. Now, when we create our CosmosDB account, we have to determine whether or not we want our CosmosDB to be global or to be set onto specific virtual networks. Okay, so we can basically say, do we want it to be on no virtual network, or do we want to create a new virtual network and say only machines, applications that are running on this virtual network will have access to this. This is a security setting, and what we're going to do is just leave it as global for now. We've talked about tags when it comes to other resources. For instance, we can set our environment tag and define whether the tag goes against the entire account, which is what we're creating right now. So we can now hit the create button. Now we can see here that there is some pricing. Cosmos DBs are not free, but we're going to pay approximately 27 cents US per gigabyte per month, and it's also going to be charged based on single region rights, $6 a month for 100 RUs. And this is request units per second. So depending on how hard we're hitting this database, we're going to be charged $6 for every 100 request units per second. So over the course of a month, hopefully you're not going to use the database more than that. But you can see that the cost is basically priced as in terms of how often you use it. So if we hit the create button, we're going to have ourselves a Cosmos DB account. I'm going to pause the video and let that happen.